Welcome to Minnesota Home Ownership Center's Welcome Home podcast. My name's Bill Gray, and today we're going to look at a component of real estate where it's not unusual to find remaining remnants of the overt racism that was once part of the home building, buying, and selling process. I'm talking here about racial covenants inserted into title property deeds. Joining me are Maria Cisneros, city attorney with the city of Golden Valley. Welcome, Maria.
Hi, thank you.
And Jamar Hardy, Director of Diversity and Inclusion and a Managing Broker with Edina Realty. Welcome, Jamar.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for both of you coming on the show. Okay, so this has always kind of blown my mind since I started in this field. Racial covenants were a tool that developers and sometimes homeowners used to ensure that a neighborhood or a specific home could never be sold to individuals of various racial groups. These covenants were often even promoted in advertising to convey the notion that property values would remain high and neighborhoods would be coveted because no non-white persons could ever move there. Racial covenants didn't become illegal in Minnesota until 1953, and they didn't become illegal nationally until 1968 with passage of the Fair Housing Act. If you haven't seen it, there's an excellent Twin Cities public television documentary on this topic called Jim Crow of the North, and it shows how Minneapolis' population grew from the early 1900s to the 1960s, and it overlays the impact of individual real estate plots with racial covenants and how that drove the segregation of the city's population. So these racial covenants still exist. They're no longer legal or enforceable, but their ugly language is still in there in these public records, and it can never be erased. There is an effort to allow homeowners to officially discharge them in these records, though, and that's what Maria and Jamar are here to talk with us about today. So let's jump in. Maria, give us a feel for some of the language that was used here, and tell us why the city of Golden Valley was one of the founders of this initiative, the Just Deeds Initiative, to allow homeowners to discharge these covenants. What are we talking about here?
Yeah, it's a great question. We're talking about historical language that was in property deeds. It was also sometimes in development agreements. It was sometimes on plat maps, and it would overtly prohibit people of certain races and other ethnic backgrounds, sometimes based on religion, from buying or occupying property. So it wasn't just you can't own it, it was you cannot occupy it. And the language changed over time. In the beginning, in the 20s, the language it would list out various groups, and it would use
I've seen some of that. It's crazy.
Historic things that we would now say are very archaic. We would say it would had terms like Mongolian or things like that, where you don't even really know what that means anymore.
Right.
But that was kind of related to the eugenics movement, which was happening then. And then it changed over time. When I purchased my house with my husband in 2014 in Golden Valley, we found a racial covenant in our property. And ours was one of the later ones. It was put in place in the 40s.
So maybe by a homeowner?
In our case, it was put in place by the developer.
By the developer, because that's usually the case, right?
Yep, and the covenant is in what's called a declaration, and it covered the entire neighborhood, so about 80 properties. And it prohibited anyone who was not of the Caucasian race from living in the neighborhood, except that it did allow non-Caucasian live-in servants, which I don't know any house in my neighborhood where that was part of the building plan.
Maybe they were thinking about the future.
Yeah, but I started wondering about, well, what is that language all about? And one of the things I learned from watching Jim Crow of the North and talking to Mapping Prejudice, which is featured in that documentary, is that this was a nationwide movement, and these covenants were written, and the process of putting the covenants into place and blanketing entire neighborhoods was developed as a new kind of technology by lawyers like me. And in some cases, even by city attorneys, which is my day job. The city of Golden Valley, when I started looking into this, I started reading Planning Commission minutes. And at the very first Planning Commission meeting in Golden Valley, the Planning Commission required a developer to put racial covenants in place as a condition of the approval of a subdivision of a neighborhood. And that was not uncommon. That was normal at the time for cities to require that.
And
So
it was supposed to make it a less risky financial. This was the logic, a
yes,
flawed logic.
yeah, and I think you're bringing up the fact that it was marketed as an amenity is a really key thing to keep in mind, because that helps us understand the motivations and the understandings of the people that were doing this. It's really easy when you're looking back 100 years to
Mhm,
think, well, those people were not as good as us. We're
mhm,
better, they were bad.
mhm.
But I think that it's probably more helpful for us to think about what was the motivation and what are the things that we are now doing now that have the same outcomes, that produce the same outcomes as racial covenants. Because you can tell by the racial segregation and income gap and
Mhm.
homeownership gap in the metro area that we have not overcome the impact that this had.
No, I mean, in reality, probably nobody has
Right,
across the country.
right.
You're
But so
left with these patterns.
yeah. And so what the thing that I like to think about, and this is like my city attorney lens over this, but it was a technology that was used to make property more valuable,
Mm-hmm.
or to make it feel more valuable. You could sell it for more.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you think about it that way, then you can start to think about, well, what are the things that we do now that makes property more valuable? Or where do people show up at city planning commission meetings and argue that property is less
Zoning,
valuable
maybe.
if you're going to do this? So just some clues into
Yeah.
how do we continue to work on remedying
Interesting.
this harm.
Yeah, yeah. I was struck by the fact that they can't be taken out because this is a perpetual legal document. They're not enforceable anymore,
Right.
and so there's an argument of like, well, why bother doing anything about it? But I do. Anyways, I think it is important that people have the ability to do something about this. Jamar, I know that you're super active in this coalition as well, and have been since the founding of it. Um, what have you seen, and how do buyers react to finding out about these racial covenants? Have you ever seen that happen?
Yeah, I mean, I unpack it a little bit differently, Maria. Well, actually, probably similar, where you have to look at the industry I'm a part of. So I'm a real
Mm-hmm.
estate broker,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm leading agents. And really, when you're leading agents, it's about how can you be the best agent for the consumer.
Mm-hmm.
And really, it's around transparency,
Mm-hmm.
and educating the person through the process. I was surprised when I first of all learned about mapping that when you really look at the heat map that they have, how
Yeah.
widespread it was.
Yeah.
I was born in North Minneapolis. It started and then moved out to Richfield later and grew
Mm-hmm.
up on the south side of town. Things started making sense when I started looking at that map.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Mm-hmm.
also understanding, when people come to realtors, they're looking to find a community
Mm-hmm.
that they can best live and enjoy, right?
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of times they don't know about the people before them that
Yeah.
lived and enjoyed that neighborhood.
Yeah.
So this was the first thing that really started, as we always say, unearthing
Mm-hmm.
the history that the land that you're occupying and living on or investing in.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what made it super interesting. But also understanding as you read documents, especially through the title lens of real estate, they just weren't calling it out.
Yeah.
They weren't saying it. They were
Yeah.
saying, sign here,
Yeah.
enjoy your home.
Yeah.
Then you go into a neighborhood and you start asking yourself some questions on, why am I feeling a little different about living in
Right.
this neighborhood?
Right.
Why are the values in, especially you talk about Golden Valley,
Yeah.
Gold Valley so much more than values in places like North Minneapolis that are super close
Uh-huh.
to Golden
Uh-huh.
Valley? Should they all be valued the same?
Uh-huh.
But again, these covenants informed our communities what we see today, and it's really perpetuated through real estate process as well. How
Right.
we didn't necessarily, into the Fair Housing Act, promote fair living
They weren't.
in all areas.
They weren't promoted the same. They weren't invested in the same.
Right.
It's all that kind of stuff, and so now you're left with very unequal things.
Right. And then you start unpacking, things like redlining.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
just the maps that,
Yeah.
we were talking mortgage lending, right?
Right.
Really is informed by when it's giving people access to certain areas or giving
Right.
them, as we say, monies to help them move
Yeah.
into an area or encourage them. You start really realizing what this movement was really, truly all about.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So this is important because we're in Minnesota. We have a home ownership gap when it comes to races, and the home ownership gap walks hand in hand with the wealth gap, and so all this is connected, and this is why the Home Ownership Center does the work it does, which is helping specifically folks with lower income be able to access home ownership and get into it sustainably and affordably, so that they can participate as well. But this covenant stuff is just it was fascinating to me when I found it out. And again, listeners and viewers, TPT documentary called Jim Crow of the North. It's only an hour. It is super interesting, and it shows you really what happened all over the country, and explains kind of why things are the way they are today. So anyways, what does it mean to discharge a covenant? What are we, because you can't take it out.
Yeah, that's
so what
right.
are we trying to do?
So in Minnesota, the legislature made a really purposeful decision not to have the discharge process mean deletion. And I think that's important because it allows the records to stay intact so that we can continue to learn from them. And I can talk a little later about why that's important and how we're learning them, like cities are using this data to make decisions now, and that's great to have that. And so the discharge process is in effect adding something to the record. And the legal term for it is it's basically an affidavit that the current property owner goes through the process of filling out and signing, and then we help them file that into the Hennepin County Property Records or Ramsey County, and then it lives there forever.
Like the other thing.
Yep, and so
it becomes part of the package.
Yeah, so the covenant is there, and someone could discover that the covenant existed, and then later on, 100 years later, they can discover that whoever owned the home at that point, kind of put their flag in the ground and said, "This is not okay. We don't stand for this." And my husband and I went through this process, and it felt a little bit like a reclaiming of this property. Like this is not what this neighborhood stands for anymore. Other people don't go through the discharge process, and that's okay too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, is it something that costs money?
It would have, but this is one of the reasons. This is one of the reasons we created Just Deeds. So I went through the process. I did my own. I won't get into too much of the details, but there's actually there's a Torrens route and an abstract route. And
I actually know too much about those two things.
So you know how long I could talk about it. But my property was Torrens and my friend's property was abstract. So I did each of ours. And I was like, no one is ever going to do this. We had to drive downtown. We had to pay for parking. We had to get help with the research people at the, and we had to fill out the form. Then we had to pay the $47 recording fee. And so we started Just Deeds to be able to help people get through that process for free. And then they are freed up to then decide what else they want to put their effort into. Yeah. Do they want to get involved with the Home Ownership Center? Do they want to go volunteer for Habitat? Do they want to attend a council meeting and talk about how they're impacted by this? So then we take care of sort of the technical legal part of it. And the county has been fantastic. Hennepin and Ramsey County are the two counties where we have active agreements with them, and they have waived fees, and they have given us our volunteers free access to property records. So that we can do it all for free for homeowners.
So, and I live in Ramsey, so I was watching when they added Ramsey, because this is a ton of work. These are dusty files somewhere that all have to be scanned, and then you have to look at them. So Ramsey came on afterwards, and I lived in North St. Paul at the time, and the house was built in 1880, and I think it was even moved to where it is now in 1920. So I thought, well, let's see if that has a covenant. It didn't, but there were several near us that did, and I was just like, how random and interesting.
Yeah.
But anyways, super under the radar thing that I just think is so interesting. All right, so there's one other opportunity I wanted to talk to you about here. So we know that these covenants exist all across the country. And like I said, I think of these dusty old paper files stored away somewhere. But as more and more are digitized, there are opportunities for the public to help read through them and identify racial covenants that have not yet been brought to light. Because this isn't like, AI yet, right? The AI is not reading these abstracts. These are scanned in documents from 100 years ago. So you can look at these, and we've done it at the Homeownership Center. We had a team thing where we all took an afternoon and did this, and they give you, and is they you?
They is mapping prejudice.
They is matching prejudice.
Yeah.
So mapping prejudice gives you a block of these things to look at, and you go through them and try to find if there's something like that in it. And then if there is, then they can identify that on their maps and like keep track of this stuff. And so that's an opportunity I think that still exists. And how can folks learn more about doing that here in Minnesota? And it sounds like the answer may be go to mappingprejudice.org.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think they're actually doing it for other cities across the country now, too.
Oh, good.
So
okay.
there's a bunch of volunteer opportunities with Mapping Prejudice.
Great. Because I learned about this in 2019, so it's been a few years. But yeah, I know they had plans to do that.
Yeah.
Well, very cool. What kind of what else am I maybe missing? Because I just know about covenants and the Just Deeds effort, and I kind of got connected with you guys, and that's about the extent of my knowledge.
I'll add, as you are picking a real estate practitioner, or as you're living in a neighborhood, there is an opportunity for you to take the step to make sure that the person you're working with or the neighborhood you're living is aware of this. I guess that's a shout out and call out as we're doing this podcast today, because a lot of folks aren't aware of it. We've had cities like even the city of Edina, where we know there's a ton of covenants there that are restrictive, decide to, educate each homeowner by sending a flyer, right? Or each resident by sending a flyer. They put it in their 4th of July parade, and they did a good job of educating. I think that's the piece that some people don't correlate back with us, is we may have the blueprint. We may have been the city of Golden Valley, been the first to do it, but it's really truly up to the city stakeholders to want to be a part of this movement moving forward, and bringing it into their community to help educate their homeowners. And a lot of them haven't necessarily decided to do that, or just their process to unpack it is kind of labor intensive, and they don't have the volunteer hours to do so. So it's really just the community stakeholders really wanting to say, we want to find out more about this, but educate everybody that's living there.
Right.
Yeah. In addition to the covenant discharges, another huge purpose behind Just Deeds is to create coalition and to bring people together who want to work on resolving the issues that were caused by racial covenants, and continuing to support affordable housing and access for everyone to housing. And it really does make a difference. There, as Jamar pointed out, there are some cities that have sort of institutionalized it, and it's a little bit more formal. In Golden Valley, we are working on training our city council and planning commission members so that when they hear at planning commission meetings or public hearings things that are reminiscent of sort of the attitudes and beliefs that undergird this practice, they interrupt those, they ask questions, they think critically about the decisions that they're making. And then we even have a program in Golden Valley called the HOPE program. It's Home Ownership Program for Equity. And we are taking unused city right-of-way, which is mostly property that was conveyed back to the city by MnDOT after the highways were expanded, and it's been vacant. And we are donating that property to local nonprofits and affordable housing builders, and they're building affordable housing on those properties, and then they are putting those properties into a land trust.
Yeah. We do a lot of work with land trusts and co-ops.
So we get a perpetually affordable housing. We're even doing some that are multifamily housing, which is pretty unique for Golden Valley. So it's I don't think any of this would have been possible without first laying the foundation of having the conversation with the community and the decision makers about what is the harm that's being repaired by investing these resources in this way.
Yeah, I mean, what gets me most, and when I started in this work, was people know there was racism in housing, but they don't necessarily know what that means if it hasn't ever affected them or they haven't ever come across it themselves. When I got into this business, and I'll just tell this story real quick. One of our homeownership advisors, his father attended a meeting that we had to kind of launch this thing called the Homeownership Opportunity Alliance. And we had Neil Kashkari there from the Fed. And this gentleman's father got up and talked about, a black gentleman buying a house in 1963, I think it was, South Minneapolis. And the last hoop that the bank was trying to make them jump through was signing an affidavit that they could not have children for 5 years or the bank would take the house back.
Wow.
And for me, it's like, wow, you know that racism existed, but you don't know what that means until you see some of these stories. And these covenants are the same thing. You see these and you're like, holy cow, this was, anyways.
There is something very impactful about seeing it in writing and then seeing that it applied to the place that you are occupying.
Right.
That's for sure.
Right. It's
Yeah, and I'll even say too, I think what brought it to light for us too, you talked about Jim Crow of the North. And by the way, we got to give a shout out to the shorts that come from that too. So you can see the hour long, but check out those shorts as well, right?
Yeah.
But like other areas, like I know we at Edina Realty at the Twin Cities Film Fest sponsored a viewing of The Shame of Chicago, which is exactly what we were dealing with here, but done differently. It really was more of the speculators and the
I've heard about that.
Really, duping people into thinking they have mortgages and that they were paying them off, and really you miss one single payment, they were kicking you out. So there's so much of that that's happened throughout the country that a lot of the stuff is starting to come to light now, and these are stories that I think everybody living within that community should know about.
I think it's important to know about it. I agree. So anyways, thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been really helpful. So I will give my traditional exit monologue here. If you are interested in exploring homeownership for your own household, you can take a home buying class and enlist the help of a homeownership advisor for free by going to our website, hocmn.org. Our advisors and educators are embedded in organizations across the state, and they will work with you to help get you mortgage ready, educate you on the buying process from A to Z, and walk with you through every step of the process. So I want to thank you guys again, Maria and Jamar. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Super interesting. In closing, I want to acknowledge our sponsors: Associated Bank, Bell Bank, Bremer Bank, Country Financial, Franzen Bank and Trust, Huntington Bank, Midwest One Bank, and Old National Bank. Our sincere thanks to each of these organizations for their support. Thanks for listening and watching.